Thank you. Cultures of fear. We're not in a culture of fear in this incredible organisation, are we? Let me tell you a little story which might at first seem irrelevant to Google. In 2010, the aircraft that was taking the Polish president from Warsaw to Minsk, I don't know quite why he was wanting to do that trip, it crashed, killing 96 people, including the Polish president. And the air accident investigation report blamed the pilots for trying to land a plane in extraordinarily bad weather conditions, dangerously bad weather conditions. But they also placed blame upon the Air Chief Marshal, and they placed blame upon the President. Because the voice recorder clearly records one of the pilots at a moment of decision saying, "He'll get mad. If we don't land this plane, he'll get mad." And the report found that the presence of the Air Chief Marshal on the cockpit at the moment when they had to decide whether to land a plane or abort because of bad weather placed psychological pressure on trained professionals to go against everything they knew. What were they so afraid of? He'll get mad. The president at the back of the plane might even have been blissfully unaware that this conversation was taking place. And yet his name was taken in vain. What were they so afraid of? Now you might say, well, you know, that's a weird example to talk about. Here we are in the corporate world. You know, that wouldn't play out here. Even if I was slightly concerned about what my boss might say if I did or didn't do something, nobody's going to die. I'm not going to kill 96 people if I make a wrong decision. Well, maybe we'll come back to that in a moment. In 40 years in the corporate world, I came to realize that the corporate world has the three conditions for abuse to be systemic. And it's interesting, isn't it, that abuse is a very, very topical dynamic at the moment. Quite rightly so. Those three conditions are, we give power to people over other people. We certainly do that in the corporate world. And I don't really mind how benign your manager is, or how loving or caring they are, particularly as we come up to perf or evaluation. What they think and the power that they have over us is definitely a factor. The second condition is fear. Corporations are organized in hierarchies. There are a number of levels, even in this wonderful company. And it was the hierarchy and the fear of the hierarchy that actually crashed the plane. The hierarchy was sat at the back, oblivious, and yet his name was taken in vain. And how guilty are we sometimes of thinking, well, I would do that because it seems like the right thing to do, but I'm not sure how that would play out with Mountain View or whoever it is that we have this sort of disembodied fear of. And the third condition is secrecy. Things that are behaviours that are not witnessed. Now, in this organisation, again, lots of stuff is done out in the open. But even if it's out in the open, even if some of those aberrant behaviours, who's going to call them out? When was the last time you were in a meeting where it was really clear that there were some inappropriate behaviours in the room, and not one person put their hand up and said, "Please don't talk to me like that." I wonder why we allow these things to happen. Chris mentioned that in the book I talk about two characters in particular. One of those I call a corporapath. This is a person with power over other people. They're not psychopaths. They're not even sociopaths. See them at home with their families, and they're loving, and they have empathy, and they're beautiful human beings. Put them under pressure at work, maybe for some very stretching objectives, or maybe even some unreasonable expectations, and suddenly the empathy leaves the room, and they start treating people like, well, certainly not like people. And that's okay, because those behaviours are normalised, and we go along with it because we're in the corporate world. That's how people behave. And be odd, I wouldn't behave like that at home, but that seems to be the way that things work around here. And if you're going to have corporapaths, you also need the followers. That would be the rest of us. And we become corporate hostages, trapped by all the positives, trapped by the benefits, the equity, even the fear of having a limited amount of time on the CV. If some of you have been here if you have tenure of a number of years, you may have gone through a process where you got to a stage and thought, actually, it would be really good for me I really could do something else. Oh, hang on a second. What's it going to look like if I go to another employer and they say, "Oh, only 2 years at Google? What was your problem?" Because it clearly couldn't be the company. And the more we become the hostage, because we have to have a denial about what is happening to us, we come to love our abuser in the corporate form of Stockholm Syndrome, where we come to say that we love our work. And we do, until the moment when things catch up with us a little bit. I've coached more than 200 senior executives, and I can't tell you the number of times I've had a senior executive unload for about 20 minutes on the stress and the pressure and the anxiety, and then tell me, "But I love my job." And I'm always thinking, okay. And then I think, no, but I absolutely understand. That's what you have to tell yourself that. Because when you're in it, you have to be in it. And when you know something isn't quite right, you can't know it. It's called denial, one of those powerful forces in nature. I have been a corporapath, particularly in my early days. I was extremely arrogant, and I had, all these sort of the high red on insights and the ENTJ and hard driving, all those qualities that we still seem to prize the most in corporations. Drive, that means aggression. We don't call it aggression. Pace, well, impatience is another word for that. Intellectual rigor. We haven't got just to know our numbers, we've got to deeply, deeply know our numbers. Yeah, and so we enter the madness that is the corporate world. But we collude with each other and we normalise all the behaviours, and there's lots of perks, and there's the food, and there's the autonomy, and there's the training. Lovely. But what I realised was that actually there is a unique anxiety disorder, and we are all suffering a mild or maybe a slightly advanced form of this anxiety disorder, me included. And you'd have thought I'd have worked it out by now. And I call it CTSD, Corporate Traumatic Stress Disorder. So you will know PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, arrived on the scene probably about 20 years ago. We know far more now about what happens to the human brain and the human body when we go through a trauma. But of course in PTSD, it is linked with a single violent event, either a warfare or a violent event in the street. Now, we know there's no violence going on in this room. There's no violence going on in this office. But the corporate world has a low level of persistent, consistent anxiety, small trauma, almost every minute of every day. What time in the morning do you check your first emails? If it's 6 or 6:30 in the morning, you can be checking your emails and you will already be starting to run an unnatural level of 2 stress chemicals, adrenaline and cortisol. Put a human being under pressure and we perceive a threat, and instantly we get a big spike in a chemical called adrenaline, which is designed to pump the blood around our body in a very different way. Unfortunately, it takes that blood away from the thinking part of my brain, the part that is calm and rational, and the part of my brain that can attach me to my moral center and regulate my emotions. And under pressure, that part of my brain shuts off, because if I'm in survival mode, I don't need that part of my brain to survive. I need my animal instincts to survive. So the blood goes to my arms and my legs because I might need to run away and have a fight. And cortisol, a stress hormone. Now, adrenaline will clear the system fairly quickly. Cortisol stays in the system for quite a long time. And cortisol is that wonderful chemical, not available online. If you're in the street and you have a near miss, taxi driver or something, and it's that moment where you get that frisson of stress. And cortisol gives us an intensity of focus. It actually slows down time, which is why when you're under pressure and you ask one of your guys one of those beautiful questions that stops them in their tracks and makes them think for 3 seconds, if you've got cortisol banging around your system, 3 seconds will feel like a lifetime. And it is highly likely that you will be the very next person to speak. Answer your own question, it's always much quicker. And since we rarely ask a question to which we don't know the answer, because actually we're not really curious, we like to manipulate people. And we'll come on to that maybe in a moment. And when that part of the brain shuts down, and we're running, so 100,000 years ago, adrenaline, cortisol, survival, brilliant, needed them. You know, spear, mammoth, whatever it was that was coming at me. And maybe 100,000 years ago, a couple of times a day, I might have a 5-minute spike in those chemicals. I wonder what we in the corporate world, I wonder what our levels are like. That we are not biologically designed. So we're rewiring without even knowing it. And actually what we're doing is we are inflaming our brain with because the stress, those chemicals, they're quite toxic. But this very interesting thing about the brain, the brain doesn't feel pain. So our brains can get inflamed and we have absolutely no idea. If any of you in this room have suffered what you might have described as a burnout or getting close to, and I think there are many, many moments when we get pretty close to an edge. And, we might have a glass of wine, or we might have and if we've been married or we have a same life partner that we've had for a number of years, they've got used to the fact that we're all sick, the first 3 days of holiday, or we actually just sleep. What are we doing to our bodies? We don't even think about it because it's normal. It's what everybody does in the corporate world. And we get incredibly well paid and can't leave. Well, maybe, when my stock options are a bit, or maybe. So, a few years ago, a very wise guy introduced us to the concept of emotional intelligence. Brilliant. And Daniel Goleman. And he said, it's really simple. There is IQ, and that's fantastic, but we've overdone that a bit. What we need is EQ. And emotional intelligence is that very, very human, like a higher level, very human ability to have a real sense of self-awareness. Since I am aware of how I am feeling and how I'm likely to react, I have a chance to self-regulate. So even if I'm in a bit of fight or flight and what I really want to do is scream at you or smack you, no, my emotional intelligence can, and I can actually regulate my responses. But here's the thing. When there is no blood in my neocortex, the largest part of our brain, when there's no blood there, emotional intelligence doesn't do me any good whatsoever. Because emotional intelligence is only available to me when I'm calm, when I can actually engage that rational part of my brain, when I can attach myself to my moral center, when I can understand the emotions that are happening to me. If I'm in fight or flight, then it's just fear, terror, petrification. So we need a different type of intelligence to navigate this mad world that we live in. We need corporate emotional intelligence. And if you read the book, there's some stuff around what the 4 pillars are. I won't spoil that. If I had an hour, I'd bang on about those. But I want to talk about something else before we finish. Now, (2019), here we are. We're in a crisis. In fact, there's a crisis just about wherever we look. Crisis of politics. We have, I can't even bring myself to talk about it. In the UK, you have your Gilets jaunes. There's always something going on. And the world, is migration. The world is in crisis. In fact, when you think about what we now know, we've known it for a long time, and now we cannot escape knowing it. Climate change, we are just about at the point where we could stop the worst excesses, just about. I don't see any necessarily signs that we're, as a human species, we're about to do that. But now we know. Amazing, people still some deny it. We know we're destroying the planet. We know now that there is a mass extinction going on. Even just 2 or 3 weeks ago, reports that around 60% of insect species are close to extinction. If the insects go, we go very quickly afterwards. The soil, we are infecting the soil. The oceans, we're in trouble. And here we are in our corporate world, and we know these things, but it feels too big. What can I do? I'm one person. What can I do about these things? Well, I'll draw you a parallel. You see, it's not. I'm not anti-corporation. Corporation has provided me with my livelihood, and I'm very grateful. I am a grateful corporate citizen. I'm not a socialist. I have no desire to overthrow capitalism. But it is corporatism that has created those things. It is the separation of ownership from responsibility that has created the damage we are doing to our planet. And we are at a tipping point, and we have to recognize that our behaviors as corporate citizens have to change. And even if we have things like the Google walkout for real change, and there may be other ones to come, even if we have those things, fantastic movements, are our corporate leaders, are our business leaders and our political leaders going to act in time? Well, we can't wait. Now again, you say, well, what can I do? I'm one person. Well, I'm going to draw the inextricable link for you between how we behave with each other in inhuman ways, unnatural ways. Here we are in our corporate world. And that, for me, is the exact parallel of what we are doing to our planet. And we are detached from that. So you may have in your possession, you may have a T-shirt that was actually made by a 9-year-old girl in Bangladesh. If you had had to purchase it from that 9-year-old girl, you might have changed your behavior. But it's very easy, and we'll buy lots of them. We all have a mobile phone. Every single mobile phone has got incredibly rare earth, precious metals. Some 12-year-old boy with a gun to his back mined those metals in the Democratic Republic of Congo. We know this, but we're still going out and buy the latest iPhone or the latest. We're so divorced from what's going on. So here's what we need to do. Because I'm not going to ask you to go and change the world. That would be fatuous. I'm certainly not going to do that. I'm far too old and far too lazy to even attempt that. What I'm going to ask you to do is to go and change your piece of the world. Because if we actually started treating each other like human beings again, the world would change. That is a complete act of faith, that statement on my part. But I passionately believe that to be true. And it starts, even with some of the things that Chris was talking about, the way we actually not just talk to each other, the way we engage emotionally with each other. How many meetings do you go to? How many VCs do you jump on, one after back to back, where actually you are not emotionally engaged with the person that you are talking to? You are in this ludicrous transaction. Do you know the crazy thing is that's my phone? They obviously rung off pretty quick. I know what they've done. They thought, oh my God, he's somewhere else. This is going to cost me a lot of money. I'll put the phone down immediately. That's what happened there. How we treat each other. When you ask somebody a question, do you actually want to know the answer? Or are you trying to tell them what the right answer is? Do you really want to listen to them? Or does that just take too long? And if they got to the point. These are the small areas that really make a difference for us. We are the first generation that knows we are destroying this planet. We're the first generation that knows that. And we are the last generation that can actually do anything about it. Just about. Now, we have, thankfully, so my kids are in their 30s, so we have Gen X, Gen Y, Millennials, I think I'm Gen A. And thankfully, they think and feel differently to my generation. Thank God that they do. But millennials are not great at governing themselves. what they need is they need some leadership. They need some coaching. And the wonderful thing about coaching, and of course I'm going to finish on a passionate plea for you to be better coaches. The wonderful thing about that is, even in a moment where it's really clear that the person that you are engaging with has got very high levels of adrenaline and very high levels of cortisol, in which case they are not available to think rationally, there's no point having a fight with them. There's no point dismissing them or taking it back off them and doing it yourself. That's just going to embed those behaviours. But one carefully chosen, curious, open question, and they have to engage and they have to start putting some blood back in this beautiful neocortex. And the moment the blood is back in their neocortex, they become human again. They are available to engage with us in a mission of curiosity. When we're under pressure, our default mode is impatience. Our default mode is judgment, because I'm in fight or flight, and you are the cause of my threat. That's not going to get us anywhere. Well, actually, where that gets us is oceans choked with plastic and all the nonsense. That's where that gets us. When we start to engage with each other, when we turn our default mode from impatience into curiosity, the most attractive of human qualities. When we turn our default mode of judgment into compassion, then we will start changing our part of the world. You see, I don't want you to go out and rebel against your company and go out on the streets and say, you know, our leaders have got to listen to us, and you can. I mean, that's always a cool thing to do. What I do want you to do is I want you to go and change your part of your world. And I want you to have a little bit more courage, because you know there are things around you at the moment that you are not doing, that you know that you probably should. And for fear of a consequence, a judgment, we are so scared of what people will think of us. The threat to our egos these days feels way bigger than any mortal or physical threat that we may have faced in the past. And my brain cannot tell the difference between a threat to my physical being and a threat to my ego. It just knows it's threat. So go back and change your part of the world. I was really fortunate 34 years ago to learn a transformational lesson, because I was absolutely a controller and a manipulator, and I was really good at it. And I probably could have stayed maybe for a few years before I got found out. And I learned the lesson of changing my default mode from impatience to curiosity. And I practiced having a default mode. If somebody brought me a piece of bad news, or if somebody frustrated me because I hadn't done what they were supposed to do, or whatever it was, I learned to smile. I learned to see that there was a beautiful, flawed genius of a human being who was actually in pain. And people they won't tell you the truth in that space. I could get anybody to say yes in that space. It doesn't mean that it's going to get done. But just having a moment of compassion and being curious, suddenly, in seconds, we have that human connection back. And now we can do something about changing the way the world works. So, good. I think it's time for some of those fantastically, beautifully crafted, open questions.
Thank you very much for this enlightening talk. I think that many of the things that you told us are we know them. If we think about it, we know them.
Yes.
But at the same time, there is a process or something that happened into our mind, let's say my mind, just to make an example, that prevent us from staying in the listening mode, from staying curious instead of being impatient. So according to you, what is in human being the element that does not allow people that knows and that want to be open and in the listening mode to be there? Is it fear?
Yes, you're right. Good. So the first thing is to recognize it. Hang on a second. What is it that I'm feeling anxious? What am I afraid of at the moment? Because in that moment, if you ask yourself that question, you will know exactly, and then you have a choice. Do I confront the fear, or do I go with the fear? The crazy thing about the corporate world is that there is so much fear around, and there doesn't need to be. So I've coached so many execs, so many leaders and managers who've said to me, well, my boss would never let me do that. Or I've got a meeting coming up with my boss, and I think it's going to go, I think they're going to say this. On what evidence? And they go and they have a fantastic meeting with their boss. And they go, I was really surprised. And it still doesn't seem to stop them. When do we actually get to trust? When our boss says to us, psychological safety, please, take some risks. Go and break a few things, and we think, but not sure they meant it. That is exactly the same as he'll get mad. Exactly the same. So notice what you're fearful of and take courage. And if every single person just went out this afternoon and did one thing that involved them with a little bit of courage, what's the worst that can happen? Somebody gets a bit miffed with you. Is that the worst that can happen? Nobody's going to die. It's not even going to, your rating's not going to suddenly plummet. Feels like that sometimes. Yes.
I'll have to read the book for the pillars, but in short, what advice would you give to a colleague or a family member that's stuck in a situation where they have a manager that's a corporapath and is, rendering their life quite miserable?
Yes.
From a manager standpoint or from a diffusion standpoint, what would you recommend that they do? Because they can't typically change jobs, or that's more of a mid to long-term solution, I guess.
That's right. Well, so notice actually this is, in a sense, almost exactly the same advice that you would give to somebody who was in a domestic violence situation, somebody who was being held hostage. Extreme language, I know, but the advice is the same. Because if you want to salvage your health and your mental well-being, 60% of people suffer some sort of mental illness or episode at work, 60%, but here's the choice. You either have to leave, or you have to overthrow. Whistleblowing is really, I don't know that many whistleblowers that are glad they did it. But it is an option, or you have to endure. But if you're going to endure, you have to turn it into a positive. So the way to turn it into a positive is, okay, I'm working for a Corporapath, it's very unpleasant, I'm not dying, what am I learning here? And for how long will I do this? Because anybody can put up with anything for a short period of time. Okay, I will do this for another 6 months, and then I will see where I am and make a decision. So you have to help that person, because leaving probably, at some point, health has to come before. If it's a partner, then one of the things is they don't want to let you down. If they were on their own, they'd probably leave, but they don't want to let them. How many of you feel obligated to carry on earning what you are earning, maybe if your partner is either at home and not earning, or has the fear that we have of going into the unknown. Wow. But you have to make a positive choice. Yeah.
I wonder, so the most things that you described are on individual level, and we all know that the only thing we can change is ourselves first. But what could you do on a more corporate level? I mean, what could we do to create organizations that do not enforce those behaviors?
So I think I really don't want to be a harbinger of doom, but so many things have been tried over so many years, and corporatism has the most beautiful survival instinct. So governments will change legislation and say, we'll regulate, and this will bring the corporations into line. And then armies, anybody in here a lawyer or an accountant or married to a lawyer or an accountant? Oh, what the hell, I'll take the risk. The parasites who feed off will just create, because the corporation will say, well, you know, if we're regulated, that'll cost us, you know, $15 million, or if we're regulated, or, you know, we might be fined. I mean, organizations getting fined, my word. So it's worth paying €500,000 to get some legal and accounting advice, and we'll get around it. Every single thing, every single regulation, people can get around. Now, at some point, because we're at a tipping point, there may be a movement, there may be a revolution of some kind, maybe, but there's nothing that we as individuals can do about that. We can, you know, go on the streets, you know, put on a yellow vest or whatever we can do those things. But we can change our piece of the world. We can. We can say, I'm not going to do things that I know that don't feel right to me. I'm not going to do them anymore. And the amazing thing is, that probably will get positive feedback when we actually, because our bosses want us to be free of fear. The crazy thing is, I mean, I understand working for an intimidating boss, when you anticipate an angry reaction, that's a horrible, and that is abusive. But it's even more intimidating to work for a boss that you love and see a look of disappointment in their eyes. Oh my God, I can't have that. I can't yeah. And so we put a fear around ourselves. The only thing we can do is ask ourselves, what's one thing I could do this afternoon that would be more integral, that would be more attached to my moral, that would be more courageous of me? Go and do it. And then let the world will do what it's going to do. I think we should sound fatalistic, and yet I have. We have time for, oh yes, there's 2 or 3 more. Yeah.
So can you tell us more about your turning point from a corporate path to a compassion person? Was that someone else bringing it to your attention?
It was a very interesting moment. So I was 29, and I was a CFO of a public company in the UK. And I'd been a CFO of public since I was 25, the youngest ever. You know, I was the youngest ever this and the youngest ever that, and I was married, I had 2 children, I had a 4-bedroom house. I mean, I was the archetypal, career-driven, I was a nightmare, really. I was. And my boss, as chief exec at the time, he was brilliant. He took me to one side and gave me some really tough feedback. And he said, you're good, but you are about to fail. I'm going to send you on a leadership course. I cannot tell you how cynical I was when it's part of the reason I do the training. He's moved. Part of the reason I do the training now is because I know what it's like, and I know how I was sitting in training thinking, come on, yeah, I know all this, or, you know, don't you know how busy I am? I would do all of that. He sent me on this course, and I behaved very badly on the first morning. I was, you know, cynical, and I was surly, and I was looking at my watch, and we didn't have email in those days, but I would have been the one constantly checking my phone, not really engaged, and saying, oh, just, you know, I'm really sorry, but I've got to jump on a call for half an hour. I'll come back, and then it's an hour. I would have been that person. My instructor, Walter Blackburn, He's acknowledged in the front of the book. And he saw this, and he took me to one side. He metaphorically stuck his hand under my chin and put me up against the wall and said, you need to grow up, or you need to go. But if you're going to stay here, you need to get involved. I don't think anybody had really spoken to me like that before. He knew what he was doing. He knew how to do that with me in a way that would win my respect. That was a turning point, because I threw myself in, and the reason I had this crazy career, full-time CEO and whatever, and part-time leadership trainer, is partly why my first marriage didn't last that long. Well, Anna was a bit of an arsehole. That is why I asked to go and learn how to train others with that course. I became evangelistic about coaching. It really taught me some emotional intelligence, and it taught me how to coach. It taught me that beautiful transformational moment as a coach, when you can have a person, you can release all of that potential and ingenuity and humanity they have, and they will perform to an even higher level, because that's what they want to do. Yeah, it was transformational.
You talked about people with drive, and you said it's aggression.
Yes.
Sound like kind of picturing them in a negative light. If we were all more human, as you suggest, do you think the corporations would be more efficient or less efficient?
Absolutely more efficient. I've had some interesting conversations with some senior Google leaders about psychological safety, for example. And every one of them says, psychological safety, really, really important. And when I ask them to describe what behaviours they exhibit to actively create psychological safety, they struggle to tell me those things. They make it sound really great, but it goes on for about 5 minutes, and I have really no idea what they've said, because they haven't really answered the question. And then I say, and how do you measure it? And they say, well, we have this Google Geist and whatever. Okay, which questions actually show me that you have a psychologically safe workforce? So the reality is that when listen, you've got some fabulous leaders, some of the best in the world, but they are also human, and therefore under pressure, they can flirt with some of those corporopathic behaviours. And here's the issue. Under pressure, some of those leaders are found out occasionally, because here's what I think internally. It's coming up to the end of Q1. We're short of quota. If I make people feel too safe, then they'll go a bit soft. They'll all breathe a sigh of relief. They'll all realise that they're quite tired, and that's my quarter gone. So actually, I can't have people feeling too safe. I don't want them to feel threatened. I don't want them to feel fearful. Well, you can't have one or the other, because you hold power. If I hold power, I don't need to do anything to intimidate you, because I have power. I have to massively over-index on that. So there are countless examples I could give you where true psychological safety delivers phenomenal results, because people, when they feel safe, they get incredibly creative. You don't hire dullards. You hire brilliantly well-qualified people. All they want to do is do fabulous work. That's all they want to do. Leave them to their own devices, bit of governance, bit of coaching, which is what we have to do for the millennials, and they will fly. We haven't begun to see what people can do. Now, it's a crazy thing to say in this organisation that's only 20 years old, and now there's 100,000 of you, and you make $5 billion every 10 minutes. I understand that. But actually, how long will that continue? You've got competitors taking share off you right, left, and centre. I wonder. Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Thank you. Thank you.